In today's class, we're going to discuss about acid-base balance. Now, before that, we have to learn the definitions of acid, base, and the pH. What is acid? Acid is the hydrogen ion donor, base is the hydrogen ion acceptor, and pH is the negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration, which means depending upon the concentration of hydrogen ion, we can determine what is the pH of a solution. If the concentration of hydrogen ion is more, the solution is said to be acidic, which means the pH is low. The concentration of hydrogen ion is less, then then solution is basically alkaline and the pH is higher. Then what is acid-base balance? Acid-base balance is the homeostatic regulation of the pH of our extracellular fluid, and this particular pH has to be maintained all the time because it is directly going to affect the physiological activity of the body and the metabolic activities. Now, our body is made up of different kind of proteins. We have a lot of proteins in the plasma, we have proteins in the membrane, and almost all the enzymes are proteins only, which are involved in your different kinds of physiological and metabolic activities. Now, the activities or the functions of these proteins depends upon the three-dimensional structures, which is again dependent upon the pH of a body. If the pH of a body keeps on changing, say suppose if the pH has become more acidic or maybe the pH has become more basic, then it is directly going to affect the structure of these proteins, which means it is going to break the structure, and as a result of which these proteins will become non-functional, which means it is directly going to affect the physiological and metabolic activities of our body. So it becomes very crucial that our body maintains the pH of the extracellular fluid, otherwise it is going to affect our physiological and metabolic activities. Now we have three different mechanisms by which the pH of our extracellular fluid is maintained. And these are, the first one is the buffer system. So we have certain buffers which is going to maintain the pH of our extracellular fluid. The second is the respiratory system, which includes the lung. So lung is also involved in maintaining the pH of our body. And the third one is the renal system. Renal system means the kidney is basically involved in this for maintaining the pH of our body. The pH of a blood is usually between 7.3 to 7.4. So this particular pH is crucial for all these metabolic and physiological activities to occur. So the blood should always maintain this particular pH, which is between 7.3 to 7.4. Now let us discuss each of these mechanisms in detail. The first mechanism is the buffer system. Now what is a buffer? Buffer, as we all know, it is a solution which is going to resist the changes in the pH. So when we have a buffer, the pH is not going to change drastically. So it is going to basically hold on the pH that we require. But we should understand that the buffer system is not going to correct the pH. It is only going to resist the changes in pH. The activity of buffer is not to correct the wrong or the right pH. What is the activity of the buffer then? It is only to resist the changes in the pH. Now we have three buffers. These are bicarbonate buffer, we have a phosphate buffer system, and we have a protein buffer system. Now what does buffer solutions do? These buffer solutions are going to convert the strong acids and strong bases into weak acids and weak bases by absorbing excess of hydrogen ions or hydroxyl ions respectively. Now what is a strong acid or strong base? These are those which are going to dissociate completely into their respective ions. For example, strong acids will dissociate completely into hydrogen ions. Strong base will dissociate completely to give you hydroxyl ions. And then what is the definition for weak acids and weak bases? These are, like for example, weak acids are those which are not going to completely dissociate into the respective ions. They will dissociate very, very slowly as compared to your strong acid. Similar is your weak base. What is a weak base? Weak base are those which are going to dissociate very slowly, or they do not completely dissociate into their respective ions. Now we have two very important buffers in our extracellular fluid. Number one is the carbonic acid, another one is the bicarbonate. So these two buffers are going to resist the changes in the pH of our extracellular fluid. For example, when hydroxyl ion concentration increases in the body, then what happens? This carbonic acid is going to neutralize them. How? By getting converted into water and bicarbonate. Is this clear? So as I mentioned, we have two buffers in our extracellular fluid which plays a very important role. Number one is the carbonic acid, another one is the bicarbonate. And how they involve in resisting the changes in pH? First of all, if the concentration of hydroxyl ion increases, then carbonic acid are going to absorb them and it gets converted into water and bicarbonate. Similarly, when the concentration of hydroxyl ion increases in the body, then what happens? Bicarbonate is going to absorb these extra hydrogen ions and it gets converted into carbonic acid. And we should all know that carbonic acid is a weak acid. Now, as I have mentioned before, weak acids are those which do not completely dissociate into the respective ions, or they dissociate very slowly. That means they're going to release these hydrogen ions very, very less. So what happens when carbonic acid is produced? As it is a weak acid, it is going to remain in an undissociated form and release far fewer hydroxyl ions into the solution, which means it is going to maintain the pH. Now, the pH of the buffer solution depends upon the ratio of the molar concentrations of weak acids and weak bases. What is the concentration of weak acids to weak bases? That is going to determine the pH of the buffer. Like, for example, if the concentration of weak acid is higher, then the pH of the buffer system is going to be lower. And if the concentration of weak base is higher as compared to the weak acid, then what is going to happen? The pH of the buffer solution is going to be higher. What is the next system that is going to maintain the pH of our extracellular fluid? It is the respiratory system. Now, as I mentioned before, the lungs are basically involved in it. And how lung is basically going to regulate the pH? That is going to regulate or maintain the pH depending upon the concentration of carbon dioxide, or by regulating the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And what is partial pressure of carbon dioxide? It is the measure of carbon dioxide within the arterial or venous blood. What is the amount of carbon dioxide that we have in the arteries and veins? That is what is called as the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And it also determines the level of alveolar ventilation within the lungs. Alveolar ventilation means how much we are going to breathe out carbon dioxide or how much we are going to keep carbon dioxide in our system. So that is what is called as the alveolar ventilation. Now we have to understand that the carbon dioxide is basically mildly acidic, and carbon dioxide are the waste products of most of the metabolic activities that goes on inside the body. So when the amount of carbon dioxide, when the carbon dioxide accumulates in the blood, which means what, the acidity of the blood also increases. That means the pH decreases. The change in the pH is basically sensed by a receptor which is present in the brain. These receptors are called as the chemoreceptors. So once the chemoreceptors, they sense some sort of changes in pH due to the concentration of carbon dioxide, it is going to send a signal to the respiratory center in the brain. And this respiratory center is going to determine the ventilation of the alveoli of the lungs. That means, like say, suppose if the concentration of carbon dioxide increases, then we're going to breathe very heavily and we're going to remove the extra carbon dioxide from the body. And that's how the pH of our system is maintained. So that is, we have hyperventilation, we have hypoventilation. So whether we are going to breathe very profusely or we are going to breathe very slowly, so that is what is called as ventilation. And that depends upon the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the body. Did you understand? If the carbon dioxide accumulates in the body, what is going to happen? It is a signal that is sent to the chemoreceptor. Chemoreceptor gets activated. It sends a signal to the respiratory center of the brain. Then the brain is going to give a signal that we have to increase the ventilation. That means we're going to increase the removal of carbon dioxide from the body so that we can maintain the pH of our system. So this was your respiratory system that is involved in maintaining the pH of our body. The third very important system is the renal system. Now, as I mentioned before, renal system is nothing but we have the kidney, which is basically doing a very important function. Now, how kidney is involved in maintaining the pH of the extracellular fluid? It is going to maintain by determining the concentration of the bicarbonate. So either they're going to add bicarbonate in order to increase the pH, or they're going to remove bicarbonate to decrease the pH. That depends upon the changes of the pH in our extracellular fluid. Now, in the tubular cells of the kidney, they are very sensitive to the changes in the pH in the blood. All right. So in this particular tubular cells, carbon dioxide is enzymatically converted into carbonic acid, and these carbonic acid dissociates into your hydrogen ions and a bicarbonate. So when the pH of the extracellular fluid decreases, that means it becomes slightly acidic, then what is going to happen? The extra hydrogen ion is excreted in the urine and bicarbonate is released into the blood plasma in order to bring back the pH. Similarly, if the pH of the extracellular fluid increases, that means it becomes more alkaline, then what is going to happen? The reverse happens, which means extra bicarbonate is released from the body in the form of urine, and hydrogen ions are released into the blood plasma in order to maintain the pH. So now we have seen that we have three mechanisms of maintaining the pH. The first one was a buffer system, in which case we have got two buffers that is going to maintain the pH of our extracellular fluid. One was the bicarbonate, another one is the carbonic acid, and we have also learned how bicarbonate and carbonic acid is going to maintain the pH of our extracellular fluid. The second one was respiratory system, where the lungs was involved. And when it is about lung, we have to discuss about the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now, what is partial pressure of carbon dioxide? It is simply the measure of, alveolar carbon dioxide. Now, as I said before, carbon dioxide is slightly acidic. So, increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide, ventilation increases. Did you understand? Which is like, we have two terms. We have hyperventilation, hypoventilation, which is again, controlled by our brain. And third was the renal system, that which kidney is involved in it, and how kidney is basically going to maintain pH. It is going to maintain pH by either adding or removing bicarbonate from the plasma, and that is sensed by the tubular cells which is found in the kidney. So we have till now discussed about the acid-base balance. Now what happens when there is an imbalance? Now, as I have mentioned the importance of maintaining pH before, again I'm going to tell you the maintenance of pH in the extracellular fluid is very important so that it does not affect the metabolic or the physiological activities of our body. And this particular point also I have mentioned that the pH of our plasma is basically between 7.3 to 7.4. So we have to always maintain this particular pH. Now, if the level of acid increases in the blood, then it is called as acidosis. That is one imbalance. Or if the amount of base increases in the blood, then it is called as alkalosis. So that is another type of imbalance. So blood acidity increases when the level of acidic compound increases, or when the level of basic compound decreases. And blood alkalinity increases when the amount of base increases in the blood and the amount of acidic compound decreases in the blood. Now we have two types of acidosis and alkalosis. The first is called as the metabolic, and second one is called as the respiratory. So these are the two types of acidosis and alkalosis. First of all, let us discuss about respiratory acidosis. Respiratory acidosis occurs when the lungs cannot remove excess carbon dioxide. Remember earlier we have discussed that lung is involved in the removal of carbon dioxide, which is called as hyperventilation. If the lung fails to remove this extra carbon dioxide from the body, it leads to respiratory acidosis. All right. So in this, I have given certain symptoms like fatigue, shortness of breath, confusion. What are the causes? It can be a chest injury, it can be a chronic lung disease or obesity, anything. All right. Now, there are two types of respiratory acidosis. One is chronic respiratory acidosis, another one is acute respiratory acidosis. Now, what is respiratory alkalosis? It is caused when the alkaline levels are too high in the blood. And when is it going to happen? When the level of carbon dioxide is very less. Did you understand? So see, the level of carbon dioxide is going to tell us what is the pH of our extracellular fluid. Higher carbon dioxide means acidic, so respiratory acidosis. Lower amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, that means it is basic, so it is called as respiratory alkalosis. All right. So I have given you symptoms here: hand tremor, muscle spasm, numbness, tingling, nausea, vomiting, lightheadedness, confusion, etc., etc. And these are the causes: lack of oxygen, high altitude, fever, lung disease, liver disease. All these are going to contribute to respiratory alkalosis. Metabolic acidosis is very simple. When the amount of acidic compounds increases in the body and we cannot remove it, then it becomes your metabolic acidosis. Symptoms I have given here. There are types, like three types are there. Number one is diabetic acidosis, or it is also called as diabetic ketoacidosis. Next one is called as the hyperchloremic acidosis, when the blood loses too much of bicarbonate. The third one is the lactic acidosis. So you have to just remember that what is metabolic acidosis: when the amount of acidic compounds increases in the body and we cannot remove them. What is metabolic alkalosis? Just the opposite of metabolic acidosis. So when the amount of basic components increases in the body and we cannot remove it, then it becomes metabolic alkalosis. And what are the causes? I mentioned here: prolonged vomiting, some diuretic medicines. Diuretic medicines are very important. These medicines are given so that the person is going to urinate a lot. All right. So sometimes these medicines are given if someone has taken some sort of poison, or maybe a lot of hemoglobin is present in the body, then diuretic medicines are given. And like suppose if you have to maintain the blood pressure also, sometimes these diuretic medicines are given. So when a person is going to take diuretic medicine, the person urinates a lot. So this is all about a acid-base balance. So we have to maintain the pH of our body, the pH of our extracellular fluid, so that our metabolic activities or physiological activities are not affected. And we have discussed that we have three mechanisms that is going to help in maintaining the pH of our body. One was the buffer system, second one was respiratory system, and third one was the kidney system. And we have also discussed what happens when there is an imbalance in the body. There were two types, remember, one is the respiratory, another one is your metabolic.